They called him broke in a room he could have sold without asking anyone's permission. He didn't interrupt them, didn't correct them, didn't even look offended. He just let the word hang in the air like a test they didn't realize they were failing. Because sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one who has nothing to prove. His name was Adrian Kade, and for most of his life his family had agreed, quietly, confidently, almost comfortably, that he simply hadn't measured up. Not unsuccessful enough to worry about, not successful enough to respect. Just forgettable. Their monthly family dinners weren't really about family. They were performance reviews disguised as tradition. Everyone arrived ready to report their quarterly victories. His cousin Lorena spoke about her luxury branding deals as if she were negotiating peace treaties. His cousin Marcus once spent 5 full minutes describing how he chartered a helicopter to avoid traffic, pausing only to enjoy the reactions around the table. Adrian usually arrived in quiet clothes no one noticed, and a car no one envied. And he almost never talked about what he did. Silence, after all, invites assumptions. And assumptions had always been their favorite currency. "You're still in that little place, right?" Lorena had asked recently. Her voice dipped in polite concern that didn't quite hide the satisfaction underneath. "You really should think about upgrading your life. Stability matters at your age." Adrian had nodded like someone receiving harmless advice. They didn't know that the little place she mentioned sat at the center of a property structure worth more than most of their visible assets. Properties held under a corporate structure none of them had ever heard of. North Ellery Holdings, a company built slowly, quietly, patiently. While they were busy being seen, he had been busy building. Tonight was different, not because he planned to prove anything, but because for the first time, he no longer needed to stay invisible. And the dangerous thing about underestimating someone for years is this: you never see the moment they stop needing your approval. The estate looked exactly as it always had. Wealth tends to freeze time. White stone, perfect symmetry. Landscaping so precise it looked artificial. Staff moving with silent efficiency. Even the engraved plaque near the entrance still declared, "Excellence is inherited." Adrian always found that line interesting, because excellence rarely is. He parked a block away, not out of necessity, out of habit. Control meant choosing when to be seen. He walked in without using the front entrance. He never liked unnecessary attention. Inside, the house looked like money felt. Cold, polished, impressive. Empty in places no one talked about. No one greeted him by name. They never really had. But he knew every hallway, every turn, every invisible hierarchy built into where people stood and where they sat. His body still remembered childhood dinners, where his chair had always been placed just slightly outside the real conversations. Close enough to attend, far enough to be irrelevant. Dinner was served beneath a chandelier so massive it looked less decorative and more like a warning. Power always liked symbols. Marcus was already mid-story when Adrian sat down. Wine glass turning slowly, voice calibrated for maximum reach. "Just closed on a mountain property near some serious tech money," he said. "Smart systems everywhere, climate automation, heated everything. Efficiency is the new luxury." "We hosted a senator last weekend," Aunt Helena replied casually. "He refused restaurant food, brought his own chef." "I've been approached by a major interiors publication," Lorena added smoothly. "They want to feature my new flagship concept space. Everything custom, everything exclusive, access by referral only." Laughter moved across the table like choreography. Adrian took a sip of sparkling water. Even the water here had status. Everything here did. Status was the family language. And Adrian had learned long ago that speaking less often made people underestimate how fluent you really were. His uncle Victor barely spoke. Just watched, evaluated, approved whatever sounded expensive enough. Then came the turn Adrian had expected. It always arrived eventually. Helena shifted her attention toward him with a careful smile perfected over decades of social positioning. "Adrian, how are things in Riverton?" There it was, the soft invitation to explain why he hadn't kept up. He placed his fork down gently. "Quiet," he said. Lorena leaned forward immediately. Predators always notice stillness. "You're still in that duplex, right? Alder Street?" "Alder Street," he confirmed. "Isn't that whole district about to be bought out? Investors clearing entire blocks?" He gave the smallest shrug. "People say a lot of things." What he didn't say, it had been his first acquisition. The building everyone else ignored. The one he had renovated personally. The one where he had structured tenant protections before it was profitable to care about such things. To them, it was a forgettable part of the city. To him, it was where leverage began. "So still renting?" Marcus added casually. "Didn't think people did that after 35. Adrian answered without emotion. "I like where I live." Helena studied him carefully. "You're 35 now, aren't you?" "Yes." She sighed softly, the kind of sigh designed to sound compassionate. "At some point, you really should own something real." And that was the moment Adrian almost smiled. Not because she was wrong, but because she was years too late. Because what none of them understood was that he already owned things they believed belonged to them. They just didn't know it yet. And the most dangerous shift in any power structure is the moment the quiet person at the table realizes they are no longer the weakest one there. Tonight, that realization was finally going to become visible. Build something real. The words landed with quiet finality, and several people at the table nodded as if wisdom had just been delivered. Adrian simply inclined his head. "I'm doing fine," he said calmly. They continued talking as if he hadn't spoken at all. That was the part he had always found most interesting. Not the insults, not the dismissiveness, but the certainty. They were so sure they understood him that they never felt the need to verify anything. Lorena was already deep into another speech about luxury consumer trends, her second glass of wine amplifying her confidence. Marcus discussed investment properties in coastal cities he had never personally inspected. Helena spoke about generational wealth as if she had personally invented the concept of legacy. They assumed Adrian was there to observe, to listen, to admire. What none of them knew, what none of them could even imagine, was that the very room they were sitting in was already slipping out of their control. Because this dinner wasn't accidental, and Adrian hadn't come just to attend. He had come to witness the last evening things would feel normal to them. Earlier that week, the Family Advisory Board had received notice of a financial review involving their most symbolic asset, Ellery Tower, the building they loved mentioning in interviews, the one they treated like proof of their superiority. No one knew who had quietly accumulated controlling interest. Speculation ranged from private equity groups to international capital. They never considered the simplest answer. It was Adrian. And very soon, every person at that table would understand exactly what he had been doing during all the years they thought he was falling behind. While they laughed about his modest clothes, while they joked about his practical lifestyle, while they assumed his silence meant failure, he had been building something far more dangerous than visible wealth: position, control, leverage. Years earlier, when he was still finding his footing professionally, he had registered North Ellery Holdings with almost nothing to his name. No impressive office, no impressive connections, just persistence and an unusual tolerance for being underestimated. While Lorena traveled between industry events and Marcus experimented with high-risk investments funded by other people's money, Adrian was doing quieter work, calling property owners no one else wanted to deal with, negotiating renewals with tenants afraid of displacement, learning the parts of the industry no one bragged about: legal structures, tax positioning, municipal zoning language, how money actually moved behind the presentations. It wasn't impressive work, but it was real work, and real work teaches faster than status ever does. He watched entire neighborhoods get restructured by people who never intended to live there, watched decisions made by spreadsheets instead of people. And he made a decision early. If he was going to succeed in that world, he would do it without becoming like them. His company started small, a neglected 4-unit building, then a slightly larger property, then another. He worked with contractors who valued stability over shortcuts, maintained fair pricing instead of maximizing short-term gain, restored buildings instead of replacing them. While his family dismissed what they saw as small hustle, he was quietly building something they didn't understand: credibility. By his early 30s, he had accumulated enough leverage to move differently. He created layered ownership structures, not to hide wealth, but to protect independence. He had no interest in publicity. Visibility attracts interference. Control requires distance. And then Ellery Tower became available. It had once been the family's crown jewel, built generations earlier, a symbol of permanence. But time had not been kind to it. Deferred maintenance, questionable accounting, tenant complaints ignored. A board filled with relatives more interested in extracting value than preserving it. They planned to sell quietly, to someone who wouldn't look too closely. Adrian looked very closely. Through an acquisition entity with no visible connection to him, backed by capital carefully separated from his personal identity, North Ellery Holdings secured controlling interest. A decisive majority. Enough to decide the building's future. No one in the family knew. And that had been intentional. For months he reviewed internal records. Every contract, every transfer, every adjustment. What he found confirmed what he had suspected. Money redirected where it shouldn't go. Vendor relationships that raised questions. Expenses that existed mostly on paper. It wasn't just irresponsible, it crossed lines. But Adrian didn't act immediately. Timing matters more than discovery. Instead, he prepared a transition strategy. Independent management, financial transparency, structural repairs, tenant protections, long-term stability instead of extraction. The public announcement would come soon, and the findings would not be kind. But first, he wanted them to hear it in person. That was why he accepted the dinner invitation. They thought he was simply attending out of obligation. They didn't realize he was there as the future controlling stakeholder of their proudest asset. They thought he was the quiet relative from Riverton. They didn't know he now controlled the foundation of their legacy narrative. And by the next morning, they would. The following morning, the air felt cold and precise as Adrian stepped into the glass elevator leading to the executive floor of North Ellery Holdings. His reflection stared back at him. Tailored dark trousers, structured navy jacket, polished shoes. Nothing like the soft, unremarkable clothing his family still pictured when they thought about him. He arrived before anyone else, just like he always preferred, because real power rarely makes an entrance. It is already in the room when everyone else arrives. And today, everything was about to change. Power rarely announces itself loudly. Sometimes it simply waits for everyone else to sit down first. Adrian's assistant Mara was waiting outside the executive boardroom when he arrived. "The audit binders are ready," she said quietly. "Financial review is indexed. Legal summary prepared. Media statement scheduled for release later this morning." She hesitated slightly. "They're already here, waiting in conference room B, acting like they're preparing for a negotiation." Adrian adjusted his cuff calmly. "Let them wait." He walked past her without slowing down. 10 minutes later, the boardroom doors opened. He didn't need to turn around to know who had entered. Some people announced themselves with noise, others with presence. Expensive perfume, hard leather shoes, controlled breathing that tried to hide tension. His uncle Victor entered first, face tight with restrained irritation. Lorena followed, her expression carefully composed but brittle. Marcus looked different, less confident, sleep-deprived. "Excuse me," Marcus said sharply. "This meeting is confidential." Adrian slowly turned his chair toward them. "It is." A pause. "And I invited you." Victor blinked. "Adrian?" He gave a small nod. "Welcome. Please sit." The silence that followed was heavy enough to feel physical. They noticed the office, floor-to-ceiling glass, the city skyline, the company insignia etched into the conference wall. Lorena spoke first, almost whispering. "This is your office?" "Yes." Victor frowned. "You work for North Ellery Holdings?" Adrian met his eyes calmly. "I don't work for them." A beat of silence. "I built it." You could almost hear their understanding fracture. Marcus gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "You?" "Yes." "You own Ellery Tower?" "Yes." Adrian slid several binders across the table. Along with the financial records, the operational debt structure, vendor histories, and the new governance charter you'll either sign today or refuse. Marcus shook his head. "This is ridiculous. You show rental units. You manage small properties." Adrian didn't react. "I restore buildings." A pause. "I stabilize communities." Another pause. "And I pay attention." His voice stayed calm. "And I've been watching this family slowly drain one of its most important assets while calling it tradition." Silence. "That ends now." He opened the first binder. Paper against glass sounded unusually loud. "Section 11 details unauthorized transfers totaling just over $2 million, he said calmly, looking directly at Marcus. a vacation property partially funded through maintenance reserve accounts. Marcus went completely pale. Adrian turned a page. Section 19 outlines marketing expenditures billed through Lorena Design Group. Lorena stopped breathing. Tenant engagement programs billed for multiple quarters. He paused. Programs that never took place. Her mouth opened slightly. No sound came out. Adrian turned another page. And Victor, he said it almost gently. Vendor contracts routed through a facilities company with indirect ownership connections to your household. Victor's hands tightened. A glass shifted slightly on the table. You would destroy your own family? Lorena finally asked. Adrian shook his head slightly. No. A pause. You did that yourselves. Another pause. I'm just documenting it. Victor finally spoke. His voice lower now, less commanding. We can resolve this quietly. No, Adrian said. Calm. Final. That option expired months ago. He checked his watch. Later this morning, North Ellery Holdings will publicly announce operational restructuring of Ellery Tower. Independent oversight. Financial transparency. Legal review of historical transactions. Marcus stood abruptly. You're trying to destroy us. Adrian looked at him evenly. I'm trying to stop the damage. Lorena's phone vibrated. She glanced down. All color left her face. It's already public, she whispered. She read slowly. North Ellery Holdings confirms leadership transition and majority acquisition across multiple urban assets, recognized for ethical redevelopment standards. They all looked at Adrian differently now, like someone they had never actually seen before. You really lived in that small apartment? Lorena asked quietly. I still do, Adrian said. It reminds me what reality looks like. A long silence followed, the kind where old assumptions die. Victor finally asked, What exactly do you want? Adrian gathered the binders. I want the family name to mean what it used to mean. He spoke quietly now. Stability. Responsibility. Long-term thinking. A pause. You turned it into optics. He stood. Here's the decision. Work within the new structure, or step away from it. He allowed the smallest trace of dry humor. I hear there are some reasonably priced condos outside the city. I could even make an introduction. No one laughed. As Adrian walked toward the door, he didn't slam it. He didn't need to. The silence behind him said enough. Power had just moved. At exactly 10 o'clock, the announcement went live. By 10:06, his phone showed multiple missed calls, messages, voicemails. He ignored them. Instead, he watched the muted financial news ticker running across the screen in his office. North Ellery Holdings quietly secures controlling interest in Ellery Tower in major governance shift. For years, they had called him invisible. What they never understood was this. Invisibility is often just the early stage of becoming underestimated. And being underestimated is one of the most powerful strategic advantages a person can have. Within a day, consequences began unfolding. Victor quietly stepped down from several advisory boards, officially citing personal priorities. Unofficially, questions were spreading. Lorena's firm began losing contracts. One major corporate client suspended collaboration after compliance reviews surfaced inconsistencies. Marcus disappeared from public circles completely. Attempts to liquidate one of his investment properties reportedly resulted in significant losses. But Adrian had never believed real consequences were just about punishment. The right kind of accountability doesn't just end things, it resets them. Several days later, Victor called again. This time, Adrian answered. There was a long silence on the line. Then Victor said quietly, I didn't realize how far things had gone. Adrian didn't answer immediately, because sometimes the real victory isn't hearing an apology, it's knowing you no longer need one. Not everyone knew what to say after the fallout. Most of them didn't. Silence tends to arrive when illusions collapse. Victor had been the first to admit it. We didn't know, he had said quietly during their last conversation. Adrian's answer had been simple. You never asked. A pause. You were too busy being impressed by noise. Victor had absorbed that without arguing. Then he said something Adrian hadn't expected. I don't want to take anything back. I just want to understand how you did it. For the first time, Adrian heard something unfamiliar in his uncle's voice. Not authority, not defensiveness, not calculation, humility. And that changed the conversation. The following week, Adrian invited him to the North Ellery operational office. No board members, no lawyers, no press. Just a conference table, a whiteboard, and years of quiet strategy. Adrian explained everything. How early acquisitions were financed through layered debt instead of risky leverage. How long-term rent stability had been built into financial models instead of treated as a loss. How success had been measured not only by returns, but by how long communities remained intact. Victor listened differently than Adrian had ever seen before. Not like an owner, like a student. He asked careful questions, took notes, didn't interrupt. It wasn't redemption, but it was a beginning. Lorena never called. But about a week later, Adrian received a handwritten note delivered without a return name. Heavy paper, simple handwriting. 2 words. You were right. Nothing else. No explanation. No defense. Sometimes accountability starts quietly. Marcus surprised him most. Months later, Adrian attended a small community event organized by a housing nonprofit his company supported. He noticed Marcus near the entrance. No designer suit, no performance. Just simple clothes and sleeves rolled up. Marcus was kneeling beside a child, helping her fix a loose shoelace, then carrying boxes of winter donations inside. He didn't notice Adrian watching. Adrian didn't interrupt. Some changes don't need witnesses. Some repairs begin when no one is looking. Adrian still lived in the same apartment. People still assumed he rented. He never corrected them. Being underestimated had always been useful. And now, he simply preferred the quiet. In spring, the shared courtyard filled with plants hanging from balconies. Children drew on the pavement with chalk. Someone always grew herbs on their windowsill. In the evenings, the air smelled like basil and warm bread from a neighbor's kitchen. No gated development could manufacture that. This was home. Not because he couldn't afford more, because he no longer needed to prove anything. He had learned something important. Real success isn't about visible luxury. It's about independence, integrity, and building something no one else can take away from you. 2 weeks after the restructuring announcement, he received a letter from a tenant. Handwritten, careful, simple. For the first time in many years, I feel safe living here. Not just because repairs are happening, because someone is finally listening. Adrian pinned the letter inside his office, a reminder of why he started, of the years he had been called modest, ordinary, forgettable, of why he had never corrected them when they assumed he had nothing, because he had never been building for attention. He had been building for permanence. Months later, the annual family gathering didn't happen at the estate. It happened in the central plaza of Ellery Tower. No marble halls, no excessive displays, just folding chairs, soft lighting, warm food, children running between tables. The building that once symbolized status now felt alive. His family showed up differently. Lorena wore comfortable shoes and served hot drinks to residents. Marcus helped an elderly tenant hang seasonal lights. Victor spent most of the evening listening instead of speaking. Even Helena appeared briefly, quieter, observing. Without performance. Adrian's mother found him near the courtyard fountain. "This is what you built," she said softly. Adrian shook his head. "I just created the conditions. Everyone else did the rest." She studied him. "Why this business?" Adrian thought about the early years, the neglected properties, the anxious tenants, the nights spent studying regulations and contracts. Because when you create places where people feel secure, you create something that outlasts you. She nodded slowly. "Now I understand something." Adrian looked at her. "Legacy isn't something you inherit," he said quietly. "It's something you build, decision by decision." Later that night, Adrian stood on his balcony watching Ellery Tower illuminated against the dark skyline. It no longer looked like a monument to wealth. It looked like what it was meant to be: stability, restoration, community. His phone kept lighting up. Partnership offers, media requests, recognition. He ignored them. Success to him had never been about attention. It had always been about foundation. And foundations are built quietly. If someone has ever told you that you were too quiet, too ordinary, too invisible, remember this: noise is not power. Consistency is. You don't need to be the loudest person in the room. You just need to build something real. And sometimes, the most complete form of revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming everything they never believed you could become. Adrian didn't wait for their final responses. Some decisions speak for themselves long before signatures appear. He returned to the executive suite on the upper floor, a space that had once belonged to the previous leadership and now stood ready for its next chapter. His chapter. Beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city stretched endlessly, glass and steel catching the fading afternoon light. The river cut through the skyline like a quiet boundary between the past and whatever came next. His longtime operations director, Daniel Reeves, was already inside, placing 2 glasses beside a chilled bottle. "Think they'll accept the restructuring terms?" Daniel asked. Adrian glanced briefly at his phone as another series of notifications appeared. They already did. Resignation confirmations, governance transitions, board approvals finalized by narrow margins. Not unanimous, but decisive. By the end of the day, it was official. The same corporate structure that had once dismissed him as insignificant now operated under his authority. Adrian poured a glass but didn't drink immediately. Instead, he walked toward the desk. His desk now. He opened his briefcase and removed a single sheet of paper, its edges worn from being kept far longer than necessary. An old rejection letter. Years earlier, after he had tried to propose operational improvements, one of the senior family executives had sent a short, carefully worded response. "While we appreciate your initiative, we believe your experience is better suited to a supporting role rather than leadership consideration." He read it once more, not with anger, with perspective. Then he folded it once and placed it inside the desk drawer, next to the formal document confirming his appointment as executive chairman of the restructuring board. For a moment, both papers rested side by side, past judgment, present reality. The calls began shortly after. Family members, relatives who had never called before unless holidays required it. Some sounded worried, some defensive, some emotional. "You didn't have to do it this way. We could have handled this privately. We're still family." Adrian didn't answer any of them, not because he was angry, because explanations were no longer necessary. Where had that urgency been years earlier? Where had that unity been when he had presented ideas no one wanted to hear? Where had that concern been when he had quietly walked out of meetings no one expected him to survive professionally? He didn't respond. Instead, he sent one short message to the family group thread. "The name will be fine. The company is finally being run responsibly." Then he silenced the phone, not out of spite, out of closure. He stood by the window and watched the city slowly transition into evening. Not thinking about revenge, not thinking about status, thinking about quiet. The kind of quiet that only comes when you no longer need validation. What he had gained wasn't dominance, it was peace. Peace earned not through confrontation, not through shouting, not through forcing recognition, but through building something so stable that denial became impossible. He no longer needed them to believe in him. He had become someone reality itself confirmed. Because sometimes the real turning point isn't when people finally support you. It's when their support stops being necessary. Daniel finally asked, "Does it feel like winning?" Adrian thought for a moment. "No." A small pause. "It feels like finishing something I started a long time ago." Later that evening, he walked through Ellery Tower's central atrium. Lights reflected softly against restored stone. Residents passed through the lobby like it was simply home, which had always been the goal. A child ran past laughing. Someone held the elevator door for a neighbor. Small things, real things, the kind of things balance sheets never measure. Years earlier, Adrian hadn't been ready for the responsibility he now carried. Not because he lacked intelligence, because he still needed something back then. Approval. And that is the most dangerous motivation of all. Now he understood something he hadn't understood then. Competence built for approval collapses. Competence built for purpose lasts. He stepped outside into the cool evening air and looked back once at the building. Not as a trophy, as a responsibility. Because real leadership isn't about controlling outcomes. It's about protecting what matters after the outcome is decided. Years ago, they were right about one thing. Back then, he hadn't been ready. Not ready to lead. Not ready to carry what he now could. Not ready to win without becoming what he disliked. But time had changed that, and the quiet man they once ignored had become the one quietly holding everything together. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't proving people wrong. It's becoming someone so solid their opinions no longer matter. And sometimes, the greatest victory isn't taking power. It's becoming the kind of person trusted to hold it,